My name is Sophia Bennett, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew what true sacrifice meant. For 8 long years, I lived quietly in the shadow of the Vance family, married to Richard, a man whose spineless ambition was matched only by the suffocating influence of his father, Arthur Vance. Arthur was a self-made real estate mogul who treated people like leverage and loyalty like a cheap commodity. From the very moment Richard brought me home, Arthur viewed me as an unworthy intrusion, a penniless nobody who did not belong in their upper-class social hierarchy. What Arthur never understood was that when Richard was struggling to get his property management firm off the ground, it was not his father's money that saved him. It was my sweat equity. For half a decade, I worked 16-hour days entirely behind the scenes. I managed client contracts, balanced the chaotic books, and organized every single operational detail that turned Richard's failing venture into a multi-million-dollar success. But because I deeply loved my husband, I willingly let Richard take all the credit. My name was never listed on the corporate registration or the deed of our marital home. I let Arthur believe I was just a quiet, unassuming housewife who brought nothing tangible to the table. I purposefully kept my family background completely private, choosing to build an independent life on my own terms, without ever hiding behind my family's prominent name. That intentional silence, however, was about to become Arthur and Richard's biggest and most fatal mistake. The betrayal did not arrive with a dramatic screaming match or a tearful confession. It arrived on a cold Tuesday afternoon when Richard simply stopped coming home, leaving his father to do his dirty work. Arthur had finally found what he considered a suitable replacement for me, the daughter of a wealthy commercial investor whose family could elevate Richard's business to the global level. All they needed to do was discard me cleanly and cheaply. When Arthur walked uninvited into my living room, he did not even bother taking off his expensive wool coat. He stood near the entryway smirking as he slapped a harsh legal demand down onto the coffee table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Richard is moving on, Sophia," Arthur said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You have outlived your usefulness. The house, the business, the accounts, they are all under Richard's name. If you sign this agreement today, we will give you $20,000 as a courtesy settlement. If you do not, we will drag this through court until you do not have a single penny left to your name." I listened in silence as he laid out the brutal terms. It was a total wipeout of my rights, leaving me with a meager lump sum and 30 days to pack my bags. When I finally looked up, Arthur was grinning with supreme confidence, completely certain that he had backed a defenseless woman into a corner. "You cannot afford a lawyer to fight my son, Sophia. You are completely outmatched, outfunded, and totally alone." I looked him dead in the eye, set the demand down on the table, and quietly replied, "You are right." He completely mistook my calm demeanor for surrender. He had no idea that I was simply letting him walk straight into a carefully laid trap. The moment Arthur's luxury car pulled out of my driveway, the artificial composure I had meticulously maintained completely vanished. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from a cold, sharp rage that had been building up for 8 long years. I walked straight into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I had not called in years. When the line picked up, a firm, authoritative voice answered. "Marcus Bennett." "Marcus," I said softly. "It is Sophia. I need my brother." There was a sudden, heavy pause on the other end of the line, followed immediately by the sound of a heavy office chair rolling back across the floor. "Sophia, what is wrong? Are you okay?" For years, I had stubbornly insisted on living an independent life, completely refusing to leverage my powerful family's influence. But my brother Marcus was not just any ordinary lawyer. He was a senior judge advocate general military prosecutor and one of the most formidable corporate litigators in the entire country, specializing in unraveling high-level financial fraud and hidden corporate assets. While Arthur Vance thought he was dealing with an isolated, penniless orphan, he had actually declared war on a woman whose brother dismantled corrupt international operations for a living. "They took everything, Marcus," I told him, pacing anxiously across the hardwood floor. Arthur and Richard forged my signature on federal tax returns while I was spending my days caring for Richard's sick mother last year. They transferred my corporate shares, stripped my name off the joint deeds, and just demanded I give up all legal rights to the business I built from the ground up. Marcus's tone shifted instantly from a concerned sibling to a lethal prosecutor. They forged federal tax records and illegally transferred marital assets? Sophia, tell me right now that you did not sign any of their paperwork. I did not, I replied firmly. Arthur laughed right in my face and told me I could not afford a lawyer to fight his son. Over the line, I heard Marcus let out a low, dangerous laugh. He actually said that? Good. Let him think he has won. Pack your absolute essentials and get out of that house tonight. By tomorrow morning, my elite team and my top forensic accountants will have every single financial audit, bank statement, and tax record Arthur Vance has touched in the last decade. They wanted a legal battle, Sophia. I am going to give them an absolute war. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved into a quiet apartment downtown, intentionally playing the role of a defeated, broken woman. I completely ignored Richard's brief, insincere text messages, checking in to see if I had finally agreed to their cruel terms. I let them believe I was wallowing in deep despair, giving them a false sense of security, while Marcus and his elite forensic accounting team worked tirelessly in absolute secrecy. What Marcus uncovered during those weeks was far worse than simple corporate greed. It was a massive, systematically organized trail of financial fraud. Using advanced federal audit protocols, Marcus's team discovered that Arthur had not just altered the business deeds, he had illegally funneled over $2 million of the company's revenue into offshore shell accounts specifically designed to keep it entirely out of the marital estate. Even worse, the signature on the secondary tax exemption forms from the previous year, the exact paperwork stripping me of my corporate equity, was an undeniable, poorly executed forgery. Arthur had grown so arrogant over the decades that he simply assumed no one would ever audit his books, let alone a high-ranking military prosecutor with direct access to federal investigators. Meanwhile, Arthur and Richard were celebrating their perceived victory far too early. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that they were hosting a lavish, high-society dinner party at an upscale downtown restaurant. Arthur was proudly telling everyone in their elite business circle how his son had cleanly cut ties with his dead weight without paying a single dime in alimony or asset division. Richard was already parading around his new socialite fiancée, completely convinced that our upcoming court date was nothing more than a formal rubber stamp designed to finalize my total surrender. They thought they had trapped a helpless victim. They had no idea that every single lie, every forged signature, and every hidden bank account had already been carefully indexed into a legal trap designed to destroy them both completely. The day of the final hearing arrived cold and clear. The county courthouse sat right in the center of town, acting as an intimidating monument of solid granite and polished marble. As I walked into courtroom 302, Arthur and Richard were already seated comfortably at the defense table, looking entirely like men who had already won the war. They were flanked by their high-priced corporate defense attorney, a ruthless man, known for grinding opposing parties into dust. Arthur wore a tailored Italian suit and a smug smirk that screamed absolute superiority. Richard barely even looked in my direction, pretending to casually review his phone while his father leaned over to whisper a taunt across the room. "This is your absolute last chance to take the $20,000, Sophia," Arthur sneered, keeping his voice just low enough for the bailiff to miss. "Agree to it now or walk out of this building with absolute nothing." I did not answer him. I sat down quietly at the plaintiff's table, completely alone, setting my hands flat on the polished oak surface. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff announced the judge. Right as the judge called our case, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a loud, decisive thud. The sharp sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room, and every single head turned in unison. Walking down the center aisle was Marcus, wearing his dark, immaculate military dress uniform, adorned with rows of prestigious medals that commanded instant respect. Flanking him were three sharp-suited litigation specialists, followed closely by two federal financial investigators holding digital evidence drives. The air in the courtroom shifted instantly. Arthur's defense attorney turned to look at the entrance, and the very moment he recognized Marcus Bennett, his face went completely pale. His expensive pen slipped straight from his hand, clattering loudly onto the wooden table. Marcus stepped past the bar, bowed slightly to the judge, and presented his entry of appearance. Marcus Bennett, Your Honor, representing the plaintiff, Sophia Vance. Arthur's smug smirk vanished entirely into thin air. He looked frantically between Marcus's striking uniform, his pale son, and his terrified attorney, realizing with sudden horror that the woman he had tried to crush was never actually alone at all. The entire courtroom was dead silent as Marcus stepped up to the podium, connecting a secure encrypted drive directly to the courtroom monitor. Your Honor, Marcus began, his deep voice ringing with absolute authority throughout the room. Before we discuss any matters of marital asset division, we are formally submitting a motion for an emergency freeze on all corporate and personal assets currently belonging to Richard Vance and Arthur Vance. Arthur's attorney stumbled hastily to his feet, trying desperately to regain control of the room. Objection, Your Honor. This is a simple dissolution of marriage. The plaintiff is clearly attempting to turn this routine proceeding into a wild fishing expedition. It is not a fishing expedition, Marcus replied coldly, turning his gaze to look directly at Arthur. It is a criminal investigation. We have submitted sworn affidavits from certified forensic auditors, proving conclusively that my client's signature was forged on state tax filings and corporate asset transfers while she was acting as a primary caregiver. Furthermore, we have irrefutable digital proof of over $2 million in illegal offshore transfers designed to defraud both this court and my client. Arthur's face turned an unhealthy mottled shade of bright red. He slammed his hand heavily down on the desk, shouting angrily, "This is completely absurd. She was just a... Mr. Vance, quiet down right now, or I will hold you in immediate contempt of court." The judge slammed her gavel down hard, her eyes sharp and unforgiving as she reviewed the digital screen display that Marcus's team had brought up. Arthur's own attorney frantically grabbed his arm, pulling him back down into his chair and whispering fiercely into his ear, desperately warning him to shut his mouth before he spoke himself directly into federal custody. The judge spent 15 long minutes carefully reviewing the overwhelming evidence displayed on her screen, her expression growing visibly colder with every passing second. When she finally looked up, her ruling was swift, absolute, and completely uncompromising. In light of the overwhelming and undeniable evidence of fraud, forgery, and deliberate concealment of marital assets, this court orders an immediate, total freeze on all business and personal accounts associated with the defendants. Furthermore, I am awarding the plaintiff 60% of the fully audited company valuation, full ownership of the marital home, and referring these forged tax filings directly to the state prosecutor's office for immediate criminal indictment. The state prosecutor did not waste a single second following up on the judge's official referral. Within 3 months, Arthur Vance was facing multiple felony counts of corporate fraud, tax evasion, and document forgery. To avoid spending the rest of his life in federal prison, he was forced to liquidate a major portion of his real estate holdings, effectively dismantling the multi-million-dollar empire he had spent a lifetime building on the backs of hardworking people. Richard's business, completely stripped of its stolen capital and utterly disgraced by public scandal, declared bankruptcy by the end of the quarter. His wealthy socialite fiancée broke off their engagement the exact day the court-frozen accounts made the front-page headlines. The last I heard, Richard was living in a small, cramped, rented apartment, working as a low-level manager for a company he used to fiercely compete with, completely humbled by the devastating consequences of his own boundless greed. As for me, I sold the marital home and used my 60% share of the business valuation to launch my very own independent property management firm. With Marcus by my side as a trusted legal advisor, my company grew faster and more successfully in its first year than Richard's ever did. People like Arthur and Richard often make the foolish mistake of thinking that quiet people are weak, and that playing dirty guarantees a guaranteed win. But they always forget one simple, undeniable truth. Moving quietly in silence is never a sign of surrender. It is simply how you meticulously prepare for ultimate victory. Never let anyone underestimate your worth, and never be afraid to let true justice take its course.